Hello and welcome to the program. This is Moneyline with me, Nancy Naji. It's so nice to know that you're joining us again today. Today, you may be wondering where this program is coming from. I am in the hall where the Nigeria Development Update by the World Bank Nigeria office will be launched. Just behind me, we will in a couple of minutes be seeing how the launch of the NDU, the Nigeria Development Update, went on. What I am holding here, as you can see, it's the 75-page report by the World Bank Group in Nigeria. And this report is titled Resilience Through Reforms. You will all agree with me that we have all been battling COVID-19 pandemic that struck the world in 2020. Most parts of the world are still grappling with this crisis, a never-before-seen crisis. One time in history that every part of the world went on a lockdown. It's not happened in recent history. And Nigeria, through those times, have been plagued not just by rising or runaway inflation. Our macroeconomic statistics are not looking too good. Our revenue is dwindling. Debt to GDP ratio, though the government says it's an appreciable amount, but the challenge there is debt servicing to revenue. What will this report be all about? That is what will be coming to you at least in the next few minutes. This is the hall where the launch would happen. We're expecting to see the chairman, Nigeria Governors Forum, and the governor of Ekiti State, Dr. Kayode Fayemi, be here in the hall. Would also be having the Minister of State for Budget and National Planning, Prince Clem Agba. He will be giving the federal government side, how the federal government perceives this report, and in fact, if it really endorses the recommendation. Mr. Asue Igodalo would also be in this hall. Asue Igodalo is the chairman, Nigeria Economic Summit Group, NESG. He's also the founding partner. Banwo and Igodalo are partners. We will also be having a cross-section of very important personalities here in the hall. The Director General, DMO, that's Debt Management Office. We will be having the Director General Budget Office of the Federation also join us. Of course, the host of this event today, Shubham Shaduri, who is the World Bank country director. Marco Hernandez will also be here in a couple of minutes. Marco Hernandez is the lead economist for the World Bank here in Nigeria. So much to chew from today's edition of the program. Marco Hernandez, I must say, will be giving us a presentation of the 75-page report, which is titled Resilience Through Reforms. As Nigerians, are we indeed resilient, or we are almost at the precipice? Or have we fallen into the valley and we're trying to get out? That is what this report largely will be all about. So join us, let's quickly take a break, and when we do return, the program continues. To stay.
The business world is always evolving, and to keep track of unfolding events, you need a trusted companion. At Moneyline with Nancy, our job is to follow every business story, separating the facts from the fiction and presenting you the truth, pure, simple, and unembellished. To stay in control in the ever-changing world of business, we are your trusted business companion. Join us every weekday at 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. on AIT, DSTV channel 253. Moneyline with Nancy. Be ahead, stay ahead.
All right, welcome back from the break. At this point, let's quickly launch the panel session that would discuss this report that is being launched by the World Bank Group in Nigeria, titled Resilience Through Reforms. Let's quickly take that panel session and see perhaps how it all went down.
And For us, it's a privilege. For me and my team who are here, we're here to support Nigeria, and especially the aspiration of lifting 100 million Nigerians out of poverty. That's our basic function, our mission. A big part of that is making concessional financing available, so people like DG Patience doesn't have to go and borrow on expensive terms on the commercial markets. But really, it's beyond that. We'd like to think of ourselves, and what we aspire to is a role as a trusted partner, beyond financing, being if we can earn the trust and have the credibility to be in the kitchen to help think through what Nigeria needs to do, the solutions that are required for Nigeria to realize its potential. In this, you may not agree with some of what our take is, and that's okay. In fact, we welcome it. The whole point is that what again I aspire to is that at least you will see us as an objective source of information and analysis. Often people with the same ultimate purpose can differ in their take on what needs to be done, but the purpose, we do have a shared purpose here, and our purpose is very simple: to help Nigeria eliminate extreme poverty, and then put very simply, make lives better for the bottom half. In terms of the substance, that's what our take is. You'll hear Marco elaborate on that. What I'd like to say is part of our take has not changed over the last 6 months, a year. Some things have emerged as being more prominent, but the basic assessment that what we said back in December and even last June, Nigeria is at a critical juncture. Nigeria has so much potential, but that potential has not been realized, and with the COVID crisis, the pressures on the economy, the pressures on society have been exacerbated. And to really come through this crisis and then get on, not just a recovery of the sort that Nigeria has had in the past, but to really accelerate to the point where Nigeria is capable of, requires a decisive break from business as usual. Okay, and it's ultimately Nigeria's choice. What you'll hear today is a lot of the kinds of things that we think would help, but ultimately it's a choice that Nigeria needs to make, and it's essentially a consensus amongst all the different stakeholders in society.
Let me start by highlighting the first message of this report, which is that Nigeria has exited the pandemic-induced recession that we've been facing since March of last year. Now, economic growth has resumed following this sharp contraction. However, we do see that it's still below the average rate that we're projecting for sub-Saharan Africa, 3.4%, for example, in 2021 and 4% in 2022. So we know that this is good news, but there is more potential to come in. There are some factors that are also dragging growth. So while we have crude oil prices and also the manufacturing purchase management index that are showing in red, and that is pushing growth up, we also see some factors like inflation and also the availability of foreign exchange in the market that are dragging growth. High inflation is reducing the purchasing power of Nigerians, and it has been increasing not only constantly, but also very fast since August of 2019, which is when Nigeria closed its borders, is like land borders, and that's the graph on the left-hand side. Now, what is driving inflation? Mainly food prices, and that's the graph on the right-hand side that shows the red bar, where food inflation, domestic food inflation, is the main driver of what has been happening between April of last year and April of this year.
Some of us in the backstage see these numbers. And I think that for too long, Nigerians believe that the country is a very rich country. Nigeria, for me, is not a rich country. Nigeria is a poor country. You have seen the revenue streams that have been shown, the projections, the way they are coming, and then when you compare them with the expenditure. And that is why a number of reforms are being put in place. But the government needs the understanding of the people, that those on the government side are not wicked people, that they are human beings, and they see the need, and the aspirations of Nigeria to have a change and have development. And that is why, for instance, you see the reforms around the petroleum sector, PMS, reforms around the power sector. which Marco just mentioned has been suspended. The reason they are suspended is the government is trying to look for ways and means to ensure that when the programs continue, Nigerians do not suffer much. So we are looking for other alternatives to ensure that if there must be subsidy, it is the poorest of the poor that should be subsidized, not the rich. Because the programs that we currently have, we are subsidizing the rich. And for me, I will personally call on the support of the labor unions because I believe that they are just dancing to the gallery. And because Nigerians believe that there is so much revenues that the country has, they are not willing to follow up with these reforms. We are working on the strategic revenue growth initiative, and we are beginning to see some improvements in revenue. I dare say that the country is no longer so much of a mono-dependent economy because of the reforms that are going on. In the past, oil used to be the main driver of the economy in terms of revenues. Oil was giving us about 70% of revenue and about 90% of the foreign exchange that we have. But today, oil is only contributing about 45% of revenue, and the non-oil sector is bringing in about 55%. We will continue with those reforms with a view to pushing revenues higher, because it's only when we have more revenue that we can have more expenditure. And that's the only reason you see today that we are borrowing. Because when you look at the infrastructure gap in the country, and then you look at the revenues, and then you decide to say you only live with the revenues that you have. After taking care of your non-discretionary expenditure, which are statutory, you really have nothing for infrastructure. So that's why we have to borrow. But there's a limit to which we can continue to borrow. And for me, I think we need the understanding of Nigerians that these reforms are necessary. We all want to have omelets, but if you must have omelets, you have to break eggs. And this is the time to break those eggs.
A lot of Nigerians believe that Nigeria is a rich country. So is it really a rich country with poor people? Or is it a poor country with rich people with potentials? That's something to chew about. Yeah. Yeah.
Nigeria has a lot of potentials to be extremely rich, and that we didn't put money where our mouth is. We put money in the wrong direction. If you look, like the president said, look from 1999 to 2015, look at the revenues that were earned. Can you see a commensurate rate in terms of infrastructure that has been put in place? And so we got this wrong a long time ago, but now is the time to make those corrections. And when you are making structural changes, they cannot be as fast as people expect them. Everything has got a gestation. Yes, you want to get married and you want to have children, but you don't have the children the day you get married. And even when you start, there's a 9-month gestation. But we have started that journey because it's a journey, and I'm sure that we would get there with the realization from all of us that today we are a poor country. And I think that that's the message that hasn't been going out to our people. We just believe that we are rich and that the government should continue to spend and spend and spend on non-development related expenditure.
Just as Clement said, the figures are not surprising to us. At the Nigerian Governors Forum, these are numbers that we work with regularly. And they are numbers that have led us to policy positions that were demonized for. For example, you would be aware that we've taken a stance on those 3 issues that Marco spoke on: power reform, subsidy on petroleum, and on revenue generation. And those positions we've taken have earned us the opprobrium of the unions, for example, and even certain elements within the federal government that my brother represents, because we've been very definitive that unless we do away with this subsidy, that is not benefiting the poor. And we've done extensive research on this at the level of the Governors Forum. We've seen where this petroleum goes outside the country. We've seen who the middlemen are between the NNPC and the buyers in neighboring countries. We know the details of this. It's failure of governance on our part as a country that has continued to allow a position that is not sustainable, not beneficial to the ordinary people be maintained. And when you talk of suspension, I agree with Clem that there's a perception we're a rich country, which we're not. But I think the greater challenge is that even though we may not be a rich country, we are a country with enormous rent-seeking opportunities that have now forced ordinary people to really labor in a trust deficit. You cannot say that you are a poor country and you're maintaining a lifestyle that is even much more, if you like, unsustainable than people who have the wealth to be able to maintain such. And I think this is where we need a stronger partnership between the subnationals and the federal to really deal with these issues and look for the best mechanisms to convince the ordinary Nigerians, because part of the challenge really is, Marco talks about 100 billion minimum going to PMS subsidy every month. If you are going to convince the ordinary Nigerians, there has to be a direct correlation between the removal of that 100 billion and direct utilization on pro-poor initiatives. Not Shopee type of nonsense that we've done in the past. And that's our number one challenge. How do we get the Nigerian population to own the change and believe in it and also commit to it? That's something that leadership needs to drive. It's something that governance needs to improve on in order to address that issue. And it's the same with power reform, power sector reform as well. We've seen it. 82% of the subsidy in power reform, I actually think it's probably more than that, goes to the middle class and rich people, because they're the ones who are connected to the grid, and they're the ones who get these benefits. If you do an analysis even of petroleum subsidy, a state like mine, Ekiti, we're shortchanged because Lagos State, FCT, Kaduna State take the bulk of the benefits on subsidy, on PMS. Barely 8% comes to us in the case. We've done the numbers at the Nigerian Governors Forum, and we can share it. So when you talk of subsidy, what is the need for my people in Ekiti on PMS? Yet, when the trade unions come here and talk, they talk glibly and generically about how the poor will suffer. The poor that really don't get these things in the first instance are the ones that we will now use as an excuse for not doing the right thing. And that's the challenge I have, even with the title of this presentation. There is this false notion that Nigeria is resilient. Nigeria is a strong country. We're almost on the precipice. It's almost midnight in our country. And if we don't take these tough measures that we all have to live with, then we have to deal with the consequences. And we must convince the president, the federal government, and ourselves as governors, and Nigerians must see that change in our lifestyle. If we want PMS to go, then many of us have to reduce our convoys to 3-4 vehicles. No. I mean, I have 4. I do 4. But I also know colleagues who do 20 or 30. And they would have justification for it. But those are the kind of practical steps that we must take in order to address some of these issues that the World Bank is highlighting. Do I agree with everything that is presented? Not necessarily, but that's why the engagement is necessary in order for us to accelerate this development. Because at the end of the day, because we're not a rich country, as has been said, we also need much more concessional lending that we're getting. Shubham and I have had this conversation, and not necessarily from them. Maybe it's not a popular thing to say. IMF in Nigeria, other types of public-private partnership, public-private sector lending. And if we're going to rely on private sector lending, some of these items that we keep hugging as government-owned items need to go, including the almighty NNPC needs to go into the private sector, at least maybe gradually, not completely. If Aramco is selling 5%, there is nothing that says we cannot begin to consider seriously divestment in the oil sector in Nigeria. I'll stop there.
Of you on the other side are maintaining a fair lifestyle. You also talked about labor unions. You talked about quite a whole lot that I think perhaps, yes, trust deficit. You raised a lot of issues, but I saw Mr. Igodalo writing down quite a lot, so let him come from. Okay, you are just penciling down your thoughts.
Yes. One of the things I'd say here today is that, we can't allow for labor, like the Honorable Minister said, to go a wall, because productivity is bad and low enough. We can't start another series of labor strikes. So that's clear. But apart from the general overview, I think there's certain low-hanging fruits. And before I talk about the low-hanging fruits, there's something I was discussing with Shudom just before we started. I think there's also a problem of trust between the private sector and government. There's a strong trust deficit. There's a feeling somewhere in government that the private sector is made up of arbitrageurs, rent seekers, people that don't mean well, carpetbaggers, people that don't mean well for Nigeria. And in that circumstance, only the government can allocate resources. And I think we need to do something about that. I think the private sector needs to do a lot more in winning trust. The public sector needs to be a bit more broad-minded in understanding the thinking of the private sector. But a lot more needs to be done, and the subnationals need to come into the picture. If that trust deficit isn't bridged, then a lot of these reforms will not work effectively. If we look at it, government's contribution to our whole GDP is so much lower than private sector's contribution. So we need government to put in place policies that will encourage private sector participation. We need government to look at some of the reforms raised by the World Bank and other third parties, and it's nothing new. Everything that's been said today, we all knew. We know what to do. The Honorable Minister is talking about pregnancy and 9 months. Yes, we all know, But the issue is, why are we not doing the things we're supposed to do? And I think a lot of it has to do with philosophical differences about who allocates resources. So we now have to keep talking to each other in serious tones. I think we have to find a way to bridge that trust deficit. and for people to then be able to trust and believe each other and pass the message on, then we can take the hard decisions. You know, we've always been talking about reform of the power sector, removal of subsidies. You know, there's nothing they have said today that we don't know. No, but we all know the answer, but we all keep going the other way, running far from the answer. So I think that's the bridge that we all need to come to. And Governor Fayemi, Honorable Minister, everybody that's in here that has a role to play, I think we seriously need to come together, speak a few home truths, and start doing the right things. And explain to each other why those right things need to be done the way they should be done. And that's the problem. So we need to bridge the philosophical gap, Governor, Honorable Minister. I think in your cabinet meetings, I think we need to talk about this philosophical gap a lot more seriously. We need to move away from thinking it's only the state that knows how best to reallocate resources. It's not true, and it can't help our country. That's what I'll comment for now. But low-hanging fruits, in addition to what the World Bank has said, PIB, low-hanging fruit. If you can get your legislators to pass PIB, we have some sort of foreign investment that will come in, and we don't have time. We have about 7 to 10 years, fossil fuels will be history. So now is the time to pass it. We've been on PIB for 20 years, and I don't see any reason why it can't be passed. The politics, it's part of communication, so we need to get rid of the political thinking around it. We can break it like the last National Assembly wanted to break it into parts. We can go back there, maybe it'll be easier to pass. But we need the investment because this is the shortest cut investment for us today. Apapa Port, Honorable Minister, I cannot understand how a country that wants to diversify revenues has the problem it has at its ports. Manufacturers now have about 6 months lead time. They can't take out, they can't move in. It's impossible, Honorable Minister. I don't understand why the government in 6 years can't solve Apapa Port, both federal government and Lagos State. And so we have a lot of problems with productivity in that regard. And then for inflationary issues, can we get the discipline to just import one-shot importation to help inflation? Since we have this supply gap for many reasons, herdsmen, whatever, but we have a supply gap. So in the short run, to bring down inflation so that people don't become poorer as fast as they're becoming, can we look at that? And then my last, the issue of access to markets. I think people who can still get to the farms are producing, but they can't evacuate as quickly as they should. So we spend a lot of money in agricultural intervention, which is great, but are we marking value for spend? And how are we evacuating? So we need to look at all these things and pick the low-hanging fruits that will help kind of stabilize and ease things, and then we can do the more difficult things.
Elsewhere knows that those conversations are already going on, especially on how to work on those trust gaps, either between government and citizens or between the government and the organized private sector. I am the co-chair of the Open Government Partnership. And incidentally, the other co-chair is from NESG. So we already working together. As for the issue of PIB, a lot of work is going on. It's expected that maybe in the next 2 or 3 months, we should have a PIB in place. He spoke about access to the market, especially for agricultural products. You see, with the economic sustainability plan, one of the things that we saw as a low-hanging fruit is access to the market, and that's why we are currently constructing about 377 roads across 266 rural communities. And this is with a view to ensuring that food that is produced at least gets to the market. Because today, when you look at post-harvest losses, it's between 50 to 60%. And we believe that without necessarily adding to acreages for planting, if we are able to reduce those post-harvest losses, then we would have gone a long way in helping in terms of food security. I am aware that some funds have been made available to stock up the strategic food reserve so that we will have some more like we did last year during the heat of COVID to make food available. Realizing that the private sector is the greatest contributor to GDP. You see the way the medium-term national development plan is currently going. We're making it being led by the private sector, and government is just staying back as an enabler. As I speak now, I have a team across the 6 geopolitical zones. They left yesterday, engaging the states at the 6 geopolitical regions. We also are currently engaging the various ministries. That's one of the reasons I'm going to run out here soon, because I'll be meeting with the Minister for Works and Housing. Because in the past, the way plans were done, projects were not projected and they were not costed. And so what we are doing is to say, what projects as an MDA do you want to go into in the next 5 years? You know, so how do we prioritize those projects? What are the costs for those projects? How do we finance those projects? Those are the kind of things we are working on now. And we had over 1,000 people from the organized private sector in 26 technical working groups working on these issues. So we are beginning to work together. You look at our budget process, we are engaging Nigerians more and more. In fact, in the heat of COVID-19, we found another avenue, which is virtual. We're able to reach out to more people than we did in the past when we invited people to Abuja for discussion. All of these are with a view to ensuring that that trust deficit is taken care of. And that's why some of us are beginning to speak out to Nigerians to say, we are not a rich country. Work with us. Because the issue that we have has to be solved by everybody. It's not just the federal government. The subnationals, the local government, and Nigerians themselves. Everybody has to make a sacrifice at this time. Otherwise, we'll kill our country.
I think for us, today, the biggest challenge that we face in being able to, from the government side, address Nigeria's developmental needs is that of revenues. And our public sector revenues relative to our GDP extremely low. It's no longer news that we have the lowest tax to GDP ratio in the whole world, not just Africa. And it's been proven the sustainable way to fund public expenditure is through taxation. And as difficult as it is, and I mean, when you make the point that people need to pay more taxes, they look at you like the devil incarnate, but that is the truth. There's at least a certain echelon of Nigerians who need to pay much more, significantly more tax than they currently, they're currently paying. And the reality is, we need to price some of our, public goods, differently. Again, that's a something hard for people to take. For instance, I mean, but these are the difficult choices that we must, make. It's great to be able to offer free, tuition-free tertiary education, but the truth is, that's something we can't afford now. And we've got to do it as everybody else did. We've got to, bring back scholarship programs, student loan, programs. And these days, because my office has to sign off for like the, federal government agencies who are seeking to recruit. And I've been engaging with the universities who have forever trying to recruit. I said, some of these jobs, these administrative jobs that thing, you've got to consciously make these jobs that students create, student work programs out of this, so that some of the less endowed students on campus can, study, work, get paid. That's how it's done everywhere. But, you're looking to farm out these jobs to, all kinds of people. You look at our universities, look at the ratio between academic and non-academic staff. It's ridiculous. And you sit there, you say university autonomy. You are not paying. We pay. And then you populate the place with all manner of people who are not needed. So these are some of the issues, but either we must free up, we must create more fiscal space, we must significantly increase revenue generation if we stand a chance of really making the sort of dent on our development challenges that we currently face. We can't continue to, my good friend, the Borrower General of the Federation is here. Everybody, abuses her, these days you're paying too much. So on the one hand, people say you're borrowing too much. On the other hand, people are not ready to pay taxes. So how do we, and yet, the expectations just keep growing in terms of the demand for public goods and services. Again, when people say drop costs, I say look at the cost profile of the federal government, for instance. What do you want to drop? Some people say, oh, you pay the legislators too much. I said, let's concede that is the case, okay? Even though they don't agree, but let's concede. So the total budget of the National Assembly is 128 billion naira. If I make that zero, first of all, this year we'll have a 13.6 trillion naira budget. So 128 billion is less than 1%. Okay, exactly. So if we make that zero, how does that move the needle? Subsidy. In terms of, exactly. So when people, okay, so, oh yeah, the convoys of this, you make the convoys, no convoy even, just one car. The entire, if you take all the over 1,000 federal government agencies that we budget for, the overhead budget for them this year is 425 billion naira, which often is not really funded. If I make that zero, what does it do? So when you talk about cutting costs, look at the structure of our budget. Out of this 13.6 trillion naira, 3.6 trillion naira is personnel cost. So should we sack people in this current circumstance? Again, if people say, oh, the public service is bloated, it's not true. If you take the total number of public servants relative to, just listen. Yeah, I know that's the reaction. Relative to our population, our size, it's not. What we have, however, the problem, and that's the problem that we're pushing with the head of service is, one, we have too many people in the wrong jobs and too few people in the right jobs. With the police, it's just over 300,000. We should have doubled that number. Agric extension workers, we should be having about 100,000 of them for, to this size. We have 10% of that. So we have people in some of these main jobs that are not. So we need to do restructuring and whatever. But all of that isn't going to save you much in terms of the personnel costs. Public service wages are very low. I've spent most of my career in the private sector, I can tell you that. So the next thing is 4 trillion naira on debt service. Take that out. Take out the provision for, capital spending. We have, 4.1 trillion naira in this. What is left in this? So where do you really want to cut costs?
So the
The
question,
4.1 trillion doesn't
yeah,
even
but the question of
scratch.
DG now will be, with all what you've alluded to, what is the solution? Do we keep borrowing from the borrower general, or
No,
do
that's
we
what I
do?
said. I
Yes.
said the
So what do we
solution.
do?
The solution is that we've got to grow revenues.
Revenue.
We've got to plug all the fiscal drainers, all these subsidies, these regressive subsidies.
But like
They've
Governor
got to
Fayemi
go.
said, the subsidies is about 100. Okay, Marco did allude to it earlier. How much of it? I think let's move over to the Special Advisor to the President on infrastructure.
We need the bank and other friends to reinforce that we're doing the right thing. And why I raise this is we went 4 years without a tariff review. And at its peak, we were paying 29 naira per kilowatt hour from the government as subsidy for every citizen, despite his level or ranking in economic well-being. Today, with very difficult discussions and reforms, it's 13 naira per kilowatt hour. Less than, or more than half of that has been reduced. And we're on a trajectory to eliminate that. Now, where are there challenges? We've moved to a situation where we're trying to transition the pact between the citizen and the power disco to themselves and remove the government. So we've actually done a tariff review last September. We did one in January. The September one wasn't implemented till November. The January one wasn't implemented till April. But they were implemented. And we're going to do another one in July. Part of the challenge is we had a big jump because we went 4 years without doing it. 1 naira 50 kobo here. Actually, Nigerians are actually not screaming and shouting about it. So where we are is, from a regulatory standpoint, the World Bank has been consistent about their message. Allow the regulator to do its job. We've started that with the ability to do tariff reviews. Secondly, we talk about the fiscal blowback. We've reduced the tariff subsidy by 20 billion naira a month from last year to this year. That accounts for almost a quarter of a trillion if you add up what we've done. So that's our fiscal issue, and we need to eliminate that 13 naira gap. Now, operationally, in many respects, Nigeria, we fail at being ambitious. We cannot be a nation that is generating 5-6 gigawatts for 200 million people. We are doing a rebasing with the support of the World Bank, similar with which Madam Ngozi did, where we get the right numbers. We think we might end up at 8 gigawatts. It's still not enough. But I will tell you, if we were doing 10 gigawatts of power, even the band A would actually be about 30 naira per kilowatt hour versus 58. Then does a Nigerian complain about paying 30 naira per kilowatt hour? He doesn't. So the operational side of the power sector recovery program that we're working on with the bank must proceed. We must meter the population, which we've metered 500,000 over the past 5 months. The last program did 300,000 meters in 18 months. We must increase our transmission and distribution, and we're working on that through a number of interventions, including DISREP with the World Bank. But I would say that my challenge for all of us is the impatience shouldn't lead to a lack of understanding, which leads to complaints that lead to policy somersaults. We've gotten on the path. We need help to continue. I'd like to personally thank the World Bank. They understand this sector in Nigeria more than most because they actually roll up their sleeves and they're in the details with us. We are confident with the support of all well-meaning Nigerians and our leaders, we will be able to, that focus area, make it transition into a catalyst for economic growth. Thank you.
And one of the things I also say, and I say that whenever I have the chance, you can't have run budgets every year. You have debt service. There's new borrowing. What will happen next year automatically is that the debt service figures will grow. We were not able to link it. Okay, so we need to begin to send that message. But the key thing is to say, this is why we borrowed, this is what we did with it, and we can see it. And I think Nigerians are forgiven. With the sukuk, for instance, there's so many people asking, when are you doing another one? We want another one. That's the way to finance. So, but the messaging needs to change completely. The second point is that it's difficult to convince the Nigerian out there that Nigeria is a poor country because there's so much inequality in the system. How do you see a governor with a convoy of 20 cars and you tell that poor man there that Nigeria is a poor country? It's not possible. The inequality is wide, whichever way we look at it. So selling that story, and I agree we are poor, selling that story is a bit difficult. So maybe some of those issues, I agree that some things may not move the numbers, but even for demonstration purposes, we need to show that government is trying to live within its means, its resources. We need to send that message. It's in Nigeria that you still have some very high profile things, and we are poor. So you then wonder, how did we get into, I don't want to give some examples of the things that we do. So it's difficult to tell, and this also speaks to those in the private sector. By the time we pack all ourselves to some function in Dubai for one day chat, how do you tell the man on the street that we're a poor country? It's not possible. So I think we need a change in lifestyles or expenditure and things like that, both in the public and private sector, to convince them. And I have been a bit restrained, actually, also, when in speaking about borrowing, you accuse the FGN of borrowing. The states are actively borrowing. It's not only the FGN that is borrowing, the states are actively borrowing. All the facilities the CBN has offered, whether a Greek anchor, commercial credit, COVID, if that's all we did, every day will be occupied. Okay, so the states are actively borrowing, but when you separate yourself from the FGN, so I've just been a bit quiet about that. I saw the last report you published, FGN debt stock so much, but I think that Nigerian Economic Council, you need to take more strategic issues there. Then we are speaking the same voice, especially on fuel subsidy. We have to be able to say the same thing, and generating revenues. We have to be saying the same thing. The fact that some states can borrow, they have room for borrowing, doesn't solve the problem for many of the other states. Yes, so I think something has to change. Thank you.
The powerful lobby that has seized the media and communication as far as subsidy is concerned. So you didn't get the analysis that we did simply because headlines were just taken from a meeting, not the detailed explanation in terms of what we did in Cameroon, Niger, Benin, and how this fuel gets out of the country, who the middlemen are, and why the federal government is reluctant to deal with this. All of that is contained in the report.
There are no tax, the tax laws don't put limits to these expenditures, and these also erode, government revenues, because, taxation from those companies is less than what it should be. So we have to have a holistic discussion about this thing, not just keep pointing to the people and feel entitled to whatever, and some of that lifestyles in the private sector are part of what even puts the public sector people under pressure to look. You've got colleagues. You chose to work in the private, they work in the private.
Did you really? Mr. Igodalo is saying.
No, sorry, with respect, DG. I think you weren't listening to me. My message today was collaboration between private sector and public sector. I'm talking on behalf of the whole of the private sector. There's this feeling in government that the private sector is finger pointing. It's not true. The private sector has stepped out to want to fully collaborate with government because this country belongs to all of us. If anything happens, many people don't have plan Bs. I know you don't know that. But many people don't have plan Bs. This is the only country we have. So we have even more stake. A lot of public sector people believe they're the only ones that love Nigeria. That's totally untrue. Many of us love Nigeria much more than many people in the public sector. And I don't want to go there. So please, I don't want the public sector narrative to continue the way you have kind of narrated it here. It's not true.
I think part of what you saw in our overall messaging is that 1.8% growth, or even 2% growth, or 2.5, or make it 3% growth is not good enough. Not at this current point. So partly it's about, it's always how you message, right? I mean, it's like when the doctor tells me, okay, this is what you need to do. I listen to, how seriously do I need to change my behaviors, right? This is a little bit about that. So it's not that there aren't, many efforts underway and that Nigeria is on the path to recovery. We're saying that if you look over the last 4 decades, and one of the things we highlighted in 6 months ago was the fact that on an inflation-adjusted basis, per capita incomes in Nigeria today are about what they were 4 decades ago. Okay, that's not good enough. Not given the potential that Nigeria has. Okay, and that's where all this discussion about whether Nigeria is poor or rich, I think actually both sides are right. Nigeria has the potential to be a tremendously rich country, but it's not there yet. And there is this stark gap and very visible inequality, which I think gets in the way of building trust. Central bank, yes, many central banks are also focusing on jobs and growth, but the central bank here has, and I've heard this from the governor himself, has taken on multiple objectives, in part because Nigeria needs action on those fronts, but there is a question about whether the central bank, through the instruments it has, can handle all the multiple objectives. There are certain things that the government, the executive needs to do, that the legislature needs to do, that needs to be done at the state level, that needs to be done, frankly, by private firms. So I think that's more the issue of what's the right role and the right balance of what the central bank should do. In terms of the $1.5 billion loan that I believe our friend from Reuters asked about, look, we are ready to support Nigeria. We have been. There's a lot of focus has been on that $1.5 billion, what we call policy-based budget support. I think that has taken the attention away from the fact, as Governor Fayemi knows, others know, our program, that was just one element of our program. Over the last 15 months, our board has approved over $5 billion in new commitments, new financing, concessional financing for Nigeria. You will have heard about the Nigeria Cares program, which the states are implementing. And I looked at, in 2020, I believe it was almost $1.3 or $1.4 billion that was actually disbursed in terms of concessional financing to support development efforts.
Let me conclude with a statement, first of all, by thanking all of you for joining this session, which has brought us together to discuss important issues, and I'm hoping that it will build bridges so that this conversation goes from this panel, from this room, into an actual, let's say, working session where we roll our sleeves and we work together to achieve the objective that Nigeria has already set for themselves.
This is the much we can take on today's edition of the program. I hope you all have been able to get one or two things from today's edition. The launch of the report titled Resilience Through Reforms. It's no longer news right now that Nigeria is facing an indeed difficult time in our history, especially where economic struggles are so evident. What the World Bank has been able to do today is it has been able to encapsulate the challenges that Nigeria faces, the possible solutions that we need to undertake as a matter of urgency in this 75-page report. As Nigerians, we also need to partner with the government at this time, like you've heard from the panel session, and indeed a government. The issue of the trust deficit from the people to those that are leading us. In fact, this panel session left me today perhaps with many questions than answers. I am Nancy Naji. Thank you all for joining us. be the best you can be, and be the change you want to see. Bye now.